Fighting decks stalled out. Exeggutor EX had an incredible week. Mewtwo looks to be back on top, and we had an incredible range of brand new decks posting sick results. Let's go ahead and dive on into all the details of this week's Pokemon Pocket Meta Report. This week's report covers the most deck lists we've ever looked at, with over 4,500 decks being represented in our starting distribution from 6 different tournaments that all had nearly 400 players or more. Looking at our week over week changes, Mewtwo had a significant uptick in its initial play rate, accounting for 20% of these 4,500 decks that were played. Gyarados and Pikachu both saw nominal decreases. Celebi saw a nominal increase, and the Aerodactyl EX-based fighting deck saw a large increase, up to 6% of the starting decks registered this week compared to the just 2% last week. From a broad strokes perspective, our week over week changes here make a lot of sense, I think. The fighting decks getting more popular suppresses Pikachu because you have that typing advantage, but they also suppress Gyarados a good bit as well because Hitmonlee stretch kicking into that back line picks off Magikarps before they can evolve. In turn, fighting decks have a very poor matchup into Mewtwo EX, not only because of the typing disadvantage, but also because Mewtwo is a heavy hitter that they have a hard time taking out with their things like Marshadow that cap out at 100 points of damage. So this accounts for both the decreases and increases we see among the big three, with a newer deck rising up in popularity. Moving along to looking at performance metrics, we had almost 400 deck lists from our initial 4,500 deck list starting sample that had 70% win rates or higher in the tournaments in which they were played. Comparing our starting and top performing distributions, we see that Mewtwo, Gyarados, and Pikachu all outperformed their starting metrics, increasing their share among the most successful decks. Our fighting deck list, however, stalled out a little bit, actually decreasing their share from 6% of the starting field down to just 5% of our top performers. The last deck list on our chart is Celebi EX, which at the surface level had a nominal improvement in performance, taking its 10% starting metagame share up to 14% of our top performers. However, if we drill down into this a little bit, there's an interesting story to tell this week. Specifically, Celebi players were exactly split, with half of them choosing to register 2 copies of Exeggutor EX, and the other half not playing this powerful Stage 1 EX Pokemon. If we split up the top performer data among Celebi players, we see a really important pattern emerge. Specifically, 11% of our top performing decks were Celebi decks choosing to play to Exeggutor EX, while only 3% of our top performers were the non-EX builds. This means if we look at this in terms of a performance delta, the 5% of the starting field that was Celebi with 2 Exeggutors increased by over 200%, up to that 11% of our top performers. Similarly, the Celebi builds without 2 Exeggutor EX underperformed, going from 5% of the starting field down to just 3% among our top performers. Looking at the matchup tables for these 2 different versions of Celebi, it's easy to see why the Exeggutor build is more successful. It takes your Pikachu matchup that's already good and improves it even further. The Mewtwo matchup, it completely flips the script on, where previously Mewtwo is favored, having 2 Exeggutor moves the needle in favor of the Celebi deck, and while your Gyarados matchup still isn't good, it's significantly less bad than it is without the aggressive starts that Exeggutor can provide for you. Something else to note about these Celebi Exeggutor EX variations is that a lot of the lists are split in exactly how to approach building them. Some of them are still playing Superior to allow you massive Celebi high rolls, but a Stage 2 takes up a lot of deck slots, so we also see some people dropping that completely in order to play more utility cards, playing only Exeggutor and Celebi, or in some cases, Exeggutor, Celebi, and Mew EX as a third supplementary attacker as well. Celebi variations were far from the only thing posting powerful results with this potent plant Pokemon, though. Personally, I've been partial to this build playing Tauros and Mew EX, which put up results in a number of our tournaments this week as well. I think it's very appealing to only have that variance front loaded on your starting attacker and being able to always know what your finishers in Tauros and Mew are going to bring to the board when you put them up. There were also some 2-color variations of Exeggutor EX that saw success this week, including this Greninja build that posted a number of results across our tournaments. I think the Mythical Island Execute is really appealing in these 2-color decks for mitigating that resource variance that you sometimes have. If you ever start on 2 water energy, you can now put one of those on the Execute and then use Growth Spurt to grab your grass so your Exeggutor can start attacking the following turn. Greninja, as is often the case, is a fantastic pairing for these 2-color decks since its Water Shuriken ability doesn't need any water energy to get active. Frogadier attacks for a colorless, and even Greninja itself can use a water and a colorless to start dealing 60 every single turn. We also had an Exeggutor fighting variation spike one of our tournaments this week as well that I absolutely love from a pure Theorycraft perspective. Exeggutor EX is phenomenally aggressive and bulky to give you a chance against things like Pikachu, while Hitmonlee can stretch kick past a Druddigon to beat up things like Magikarp or whatever else other people are setting up in their backline that Exeggutor wouldn't be able to run down quickly to begin with. Overall, I have to say I'm not that surprised to see Exeggutor EX variations really coming to the forefront in terms of performance this week. To me personally, Exeggutor EX has for a long time felt like one of the more powerful cards in Pokemon Pocket that lacked a proper supporting cast around it to really leverage the strength that it brings to the game. In particular, it being the singular best card in the game when you're going first, i.e. have first evolution advantage instead of first energy advantage, lets you break serve in a way that's really interesting. Most of the decks in this format want to go second for that first energy advantage, and Exeggutor flipping the script and letting you run them out of the gate with this powerful stage 1 lets you get a lot of free game wins, especially when your first coin comes up heads. Overall, I gotta say I'm really enjoying Pokemon Pocket's gameplay after the Mythical Island expansion. While Pikachu, Gyarados, and Mewtwo are our clear best decks if you're someone that's looking to optimize and play one of those, it also feels like tools from Tauros and Mew, as well as our base set cards like Hitmonlee and now Exeggutor EX finding new homes, give us lots of key ways to attack the metagame. I'm not going to rehash all the specifics of how those best decks work this week, you've probably heard it before, but if you're someone that's new here, consider checking out the link to my latest best decks tier list in the video description down below, where I get into more details on those. As always, I would love to hear what decks you've been enjoying attacking the meta with in the comments down below, and where you think this format's going to head in the future. Do you think Mewtwo will continue to be the most played, or with fighting decks coming up a little bit short this week, will we see a rise in something else if those start to fall off a little bit? If you made it this far into the video, I'd also ask that you consider smashing that like button. You probably enjoyed a good bit of my breakdown. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel as well. I do these meta reports that are very data driven on a weekly basis. I also do a lot of off meta deck highlights and high level tournament gameplay here 7 days a week, and I'd love to see you back again sometime. Thanks for making it through to the end, and may your next pack be an excellent one.